You need to listen to what your potential customers expect from your product and pivot your offering accordingly.
So for us it was like visualizations were a pivot point, because we were like highly specific, highly technical output, and what we saw, our customers just didn't understand it, so it should be more dumbed down. And that was like for us such a huge pivot to like remove all of the detailed information and replace it by high level information. And we didn't thought we should do that, but in the end, like, the customers decided they would understand the product better, or they would feel they understand the product better if it's more dumbed down and easier to understand, and so we changed that.
Make sure that your potential market is big enough to build your business on. If it is merely a niche market, all your efforts may not pay off in the end.
Before you start a business, make sure the problem is big enough to solve. Because if it's a problem of like 1 million or even less than that, why go through all the effort, all the nights of working, all the parties that you miss, if you're solving a really tiny problem? So before you start with something, okay, assess how big is the problem that I'm solving, and just shoot off as many ideas that are crap. Just work on an idea like a year after this, after you've shut down your crappy idea, and until you find a really great one, and start working on that.
Don't build the product until you have identified enough customers. When you don't have enough customers yet, even building a prototype may be a big waste of time.
I think every engineer should fake it before they even build a product. So first you do the numbers, and then you build a fake product, and then you build a prototype. I think that's the best way, because what you see is a lot of engineers building a prototype first, not knowing how big the business is, not knowing if they're even customers. So all the time you put in the prototype, it's just wasted time. If nobody wants your prototype, it's a waste of time. Just start with a PowerPoint maybe. And then what we do is, so you often hear engineers like talking about, okay, we've built the best code, we've built so many tests, and now it's a feature that nobody uses and everybody throws it away.
The price of your product should not depend on your cost price, but must be related to the value it creates for the customer.
Okay, so pricing is always challenging, especially when it is security, and especially before a company gets hacked, your prices are lower than after the company got hacked and they noticed the damages. If you look at the statistics, like the majority of the smaller companies are bankrupt after they've been hacked. And so it's really hard to price security in that way. So what we did is we looked at competing solutions. We took prices from that, and we looked at, okay, how much time does it take to integrate a solution, and so we've quantified the amount of time that you need to invest, and then it's like how easy the product is to use, and we've quantified that as well, and we sort of came up with a pricing that quantifies or benefit of our product, and then we needed to have a scale that everybody understands in, okay, if we integrate in like twice the amount of applications, that we get like twice the amount of revenues as well, in a way that people understand. And so we figured out that people understand how many application instances they are running, and that's a metric you understand, instead of how many packets per second you have on your network.
While the general product offering is more or less the same, each of your 4 market segments may be slightly different, which leads to different specific value propositions and different marketing and sales strategies.
So if you look at our markets, we segment in these 4 segments: theater, business, festivals, and sports. And all of these markets use the same basics in ticketing or registration. We do, however, segment between these, because the marketing and sales for these different markets is a bit different. Also, there are specific features developed to service a specific market. So you can imagine that a seat selection solution, when ordering your tickets, it's relevant for a theater, but it isn't relevant for a festival. So in that sense, it's very useful to segment between these kinds of markets, but also considering marketing and sales. A festival requires a different approach than a business event.
In addition to the direct service you are offering, you should explore other options to upsell additional products. But make sure that this will not conflict with your main offering, for instance by annoying and thereby losing customers?
Looking at the different business model implementations that we've looked at, I think we've tested several. So third-party ads, having the organizer pay a monthly subscription fee for our services. We've looked at putting the service fees or getting our revenue from the service fees. We've tried getting our revenue from the transaction fees. We've tried getting our revenue from like a per ticket price from the organizer instead of from the visitor. So those were the experiments we did. We're also thinking about experimenting with third-party products in the ticket shops. So we call it the Ryanair model, where when you buy plane tickets, you're like offered all kinds of third-party products such as insurances, hotels, suitcases. Those are things we're also looking at. So if we're able to generate enough revenue from third-party offers in the ticket shop, then that might be an option. But still, an organizer can say, no, I don't want all of that junk in my ticket shop. I rather have the visitor pay a fee per ticket. Then that's fine too. That's the way we're doing it now. So it also really depends on the organizer of the event, in what way we're able to generate revenue.
While an engineer is usually looking for the best, the smartest and the most elegant solution, the customer just wants to solve his problem and does not really care how it works under the hood. Moreover, the customer wants the solution to be as cheap as possible and is unwilling to pay for additional bells and whistles, which are unrelated to solving the core of the problem.
Most of all, they speak a different language a little bit. So I think some of the feedback we've gotten, or at least I've seen throughout the last year or so, is that if you're from TU Delft, you like elegant technological solutions. You want to make a beautiful solution to a problem. Whereas in the business world, they simply do not care. They don't care how we solve the problem, as long as we solve the problem and it's cheap. So they really speak a different language there, and I think you have to do both. You have to have a very good solution, but it also has to speak their language and translate it into a business case that makes sense. And they do not care how technical, sophisticated your solution is, as long as it solves their problem and is cheap.
What you envisioned as the solution might actually create an unforeseen problem. Pivoting your product to avoid that problem may lead to a much better solution.
What we're doing now is we're using Wi-Fi, 4G, GSM signals, so existing communication signals as a power source. But initially we built our own box that was sending out radio frequency signals. As it turns out, that disturbs existing signals a lot. So there's a ton of regulation problems there. And that's something you just cannot change. So there was a time where we were thinking, well, this road is a bit of a dead end, because we're never going to be able to put these boxes sending out these signals everywhere, because it's disturbing what's already there. But then we made the transition saying, well, these boxes already exist. We simply call them Wi-Fi routers right now, or a telecom tower. So then we pivoted to that. But initially we're kind of on a dead track there.
You need to quantify the pain that the customer experiences. Therefore, you must talk to various people along the value chain of where your product will be applied.
What we did is we talked to a lot of companies that are doing maintenance in buildings. So in that way we kind of had to uncover how that whole value chain works in building management. But a big part of it is that there's companies who do installations and maintenance. And by talking to them a lot, we found out that on average you have to change the batteries in a sensor between 6 to 18 months. And this costs them between 10 to 35 euros. So we have one example at Schiphol Airport, where they have more than 100,000 sensors at the airport. And there's somebody just full-time employed, just walking around with a ladder, just changing batteries. So this is just a lot of cost for them in the end. So then you can start building a business case. If you know how much money it's costing them, then you simply need to improve upon that. And our proposition is, well, you don't need to do that at all anymore. So if you look at a sensor and you want to use it for 10 to 15 years, you have this cost of ownership. So every time those 6 to 18 months you're sending somebody there and you're paying him 10 to 35 euros to change the battery, that adds up to a cost of ownership. So how much money has this sensor cost me over those 10 to 15 years lifetime? And that becomes a lot. So that can easily be 400 or 500 euros. Whereas the actual purchasing cost is only maybe 40 or 50 euros. So if you're able to get rid of all those maintenance costs, the cost of ownership drops dramatically.
What is the best business model? Do you simply sell your product, or will there be some sort of licensing strategy?
There's really two different possibilities. So you can simply sell the product, as most sensors do, and that makes sense for a lot of companies. But the problem you still have there is that there's a big upfront investment. So if you want to deploy 5,000 or 10,000 sensors in a big office building, that it's still quite a significant investment for them, because maybe those sensors will be 40, 50 euros. So there is a new kind of trend going on, but this is still very, very sort of early stage, which is more subscription or lease based, where you're simply offering data. And you say, well, we handle the entire part, everything attached to that, and we just guarantee you get the data you need. Because actually nobody wants sensors. Sensors themselves are not interesting. They want the data that the sensors generate, because that's what is helping them control their buildings better. So in that sense, we can completely take away that part for them and simply say, all right, you pay 2 euros per room, for example, and we'll give you all the data you need. So that's a really different model, but this is still quite a new proposition in that market. So right now we are testing ourselves on what traction that is generating and what people like about it or they don't like.
Don't build your prototype until you have confirmation that this is exactly what the customer wants from your product.
I started in the airport market. So when I made this sketch of a machine that could just take up all the snow from one runway, I thought, okay, I've made now this sketch. I think it's a good idea, but the market should confirm if the idea is good, yes or no. So I approached Amsterdam Airport Schiphol and I asked them, how do you feel about this sketch and would this help you? And they said, well, never heard of snow compression before, so that's interesting. But did you consider about getting this machine on and off the runway? How do you see some guy steering this machine, and all these practical challenges that airports face in order to make this machine work, yes or no. So I started with the airport market, and I was offered a master thesis spot at the airport. So my current focus is still airport market.
Depending on the feedback from potential customers, your product could change significantly.
The idea was perceived from a personal challenge I experienced. It wasn't not necessarily something that was like a market goal, like help us. But when I came up with a potential solution, they said, well, never heard of this before, never thought of it before, this could work. And then the original idea, the original sketch I made for the runways, basically changed due to the feedback of the airports to a solution not for the runways, but for the aprons, so at the gate where as a passenger you get in and out. So the product also changed over time.
Are you on the right track? Feedback from potential customers is vital. They know exactly what their problem is, and they are in the best position to judge whether your product idea will provide the desired solution.
The feedback from the market about whether your idea is good, yes or no, is like the most important thing you can get if you like engineer or invent something, because that will tell you if you're doing a good job, yes or no, which is from a personal perspective always good to know if you're doing something good, yes or no. But it will also guide you in order to make your product and your company better. So getting feedback from customers, which I got from the very first part when I present the sketch to Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, it's vital. So if you make your first sketch, go to the market straight away, get feedback, and if that's positive, file a patent.
The technology might be excellent, but that does not automatically imply that the product is excellent too.
When I presented the sketch to Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, I was showing a technology, compressing snow, but I was also showing a product, and it was a very simple sketch, and the product was for runways. And the feedback they gave me was that the technology was good, but the product I envisioned for the runways was shit. So they basically told me, how about thinking about using this technology for another part of our airports, for example, the gate area, where as a passenger you get in and out. So that basically made me shift my focus more to like where the problem is the biggest. And that feedback determined a lot. It shaped my product.
How does your product help the customer, and what is it worth to them?
If you get feedback from a customer that the solution you provide is good, then it's very helpful to try to understand why it is a good solution and why it is a good solution for them. So they will tell you a little bit about what the value proposition is for them, and in order to make your business case really good, you really need to ask your customer, how does it help you and what aspects, and then you need to quantify those the value proposition you offer. Sometimes it's quantitative, so you really can put a euro sign on it, or it's qualitative, and then you can't put a euro sign on it, but it also helps you in selling your product. So if you can determine this business case of what it offers, what the value is you offer to a customer, then you can determine what the product could cost. And then you start calculating of what it would cost if you make it. And the difference should be larger than zero.
If your product is significantly better than the competition, you can use that as leverage in your pricing strategy.
If you price your product, you can look at it from different perspectives. The most important perspective is, in my view, the value you offer to your customers. And you can also look at it from a way of what are the current technologies where you're competing with, and those technologies also have a price tag. So if the value you offer is far more than what the current technologies can offer, then there's the difference which you can calculate in your price. And then you also reach a point that if you're better than the current technologies, you may ask a higher price. But if it's like tenfold more, then people start questioning, okay, why tenfold more? So there should always be a right balance in what value you offer and make sure it's realistic as well.
After you have found your first customer, you should look for other potential customers with the same problem and the need for your solution.
This first customer has also very good knowledge about his own market, so he knows your other customers. In case of airports, they know each other very well because they've got similar challenges. So they come together as a market, for example, each year in order to discuss the operational challenges of snow removal. So they know each other very well. So it's very easy to get in touch with other airports. So what I did was already in a very early stage, I went to other airports, and with the second and the third sketch I just got from Schiphol, I asked them, how do you feel about this? And they gave me some more feedback, and then altogether you come up with a product that works everywhere.
How do you fit the technology that was the result of fundamental research with real needs in the market? By talking to potential customers, of course. But beware, the product user is not always the one who controls the budget.
It was really a combination from fundamental research and a clear market need. And how we matched that was by really talking to people in the field. So when we had our first products, we really went out to talk and see, to get the customers' feedback. And a very interesting thing was in the beginning when we had our first prototype, we went out, we invited cardiologists, veterinarian researchers, and we gave a live action demonstration with our first prototype. And we could see the enthusiasm of these people, and we could learn a lot. They could see what we were developing, and we could learn how they could use our products in their clinical practice. So that gave us a lot of information, and that helped us to further develop this product.